I'm Ace Buchan. I'm a professional surfer from the Central Coast. Growing up on the Central Coast was a dream for a young kid that loved the ocean as much as I did and had this amazing playground to go and explore, to kind of have the chance to wake up and, watch the sunrise, pre-dawn light kind of turn into those beautiful blue and pink hues. Nature, in the way that it was kind of intended is really special. The beaches and the space that we have on the Central Coast has given me a lot of clarity, and it's kept me grounded. It's kept my keel upright when things have gone a little bit crazy in my life, and being able to glide along the face of a moving piece of ocean that's been generated hundreds of thousands of miles away, it's a feeling like no other. One of the things I really love about the Central Coast is that there are these beautiful kind of swathes of land that have been declared national parks, and as a child I was lucky enough to start experiencing that with my parents. To now go and do that with my kids is really special. Being able to kind of walk through the bush and not see anyone else and just kind of listen to the sounds and sometimes just drop the surfboards and go exploring, I feel pretty lucky to have access to. For tens of thousands of years, people have inhabited this land and looked after it and cared for it, and we need to respect this beautiful playground that we've been lucky enough to call home. Something pretty special.
Right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Apologise for running slightly late, but the timetable under which we're having to act upon as the result of decisions that other outside entities have made has necessitated an enormous amount of work in a very short period of time. So I have to say the papers have only just arrived, so apologies that they've not been available to members of the public to have a look at up till now, but you will get your chance to look at things later. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we're meeting today and pay my respects to members and elders both past and present. So welcome to the 20th December 2021 Central Coast Extraordinary Meeting. I now declare the meeting open. Now, the suite of papers that has been considered today, apart from the monthly financial and investment report, is about enabling us to be able to complete our application to IPART. Almost exactly to the day last year, we received our $100 million loan. And at that point in time, I would like to remind the community the council was in the extraordinary position of having to repay over the 10 years following 1 year ago, approximately $300 million, which came about because of the $100 million loan we had just received, which requires paying back, and also the $200 million of unlawfully used funds from the external and internally restricted reserves, which also we need to pay back. So 12 months ago, we were staring down the wall of having to actually look at repaying $300 million. But we put in place a plan to put us back into financial sustainability. And this include, of course, the well-tabulated asset sales, a heavy reduction in staff numbers, a reduction in capital expenditure, and an increase in revenue from IPART. Now, IPART, in their wisdom, chose to only give us 3 years. And this, of course, has complicated our arrangements with the bank, whereby we're under a regime of principal and interest for the next 10 years. So unfortunately, if we are to lose the money, the $26 million, then further cuts will need to be made to the organisation to maintain, in order to maintain the current rate structure. And I and the CEO and a couple of the directors will speak more to this in the suite of papers that come up. So that's all I'll say at this beginning. Item 1.1, disclosures of interest. I have no conflicts to disclose. I don't believe anybody else has. No. So I will now resolve to adopt the recommendations on the screen as shown. We now move to the substantive item, which is item 2.1. Now, this is the adoption of the draft revised community strategic plan, the draft delivery program and operational plan, the draft fees and charges, draft long-term financial plan, draft workforce management strategy, and draft revised asset management strategy for public exhibition. So I'll ask, I think, the CEO, Mr. Farmer, to sort of introduce that area.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. As part of the IPART special rate variation process, there's a requirement that Council advertise and review its current suite of planning proposals to look at the alternatives that may occur should or should not special rate variation be granted. And as a result of that, we've developed draft documents for public exhibition. So this is not, and I think that we need to get the wording right, we are endorsing for exhibition, or the recommendation is to endorse for exhibition a series of strategic documents for consideration. Unfortunately, the timing's not what many people would consider to be ideal. It's not our timing. It's the timing that's set for us for IPART, by IPART, as we have to have an application into IPART in early February. This would not be the last review of these documents. Post this process, we will then go into the formal budget process, and then obviously we would anticipate doing a significant review of our planning documents on the assumption that we have an elected council returning towards the end of this year. I'll hand over to Mr. Milliken, who will provide some more detail.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Administrator. This item, as the CEO reflected, is the adoption of the IPNR suite for the purposes of public exhibition. I will speak to the community strategic plan, and then I'll hand over to Natalia Cowley to talk through the other elements of the IPNR suite.
Just bring the mic closer if you could. Yeah, just bring the whole mic closer and speak into it. Yep.
So the community strategic plan represents the highest level of strategic planning undertaken by a local council and identifies the main priorities and aspirations of the community. The original CSP was adopted in 2018, and since that point in time, the financial situation of the organisation has significantly changed. Now, we know through previous consultation done in late 2020 that the community has strong views, strong feelings about the financial situation. This should be reflected in the CSP. Now, as the CEO noted, the CSP is usually reviewed at the point of an incoming council. Now, that still will be done in the future. When an incoming council comes back in, we will go through this process again. But for the purposes of the SRV application, IPART have requested us to put a revised CSP and the entire IPNR suite on exhibition. Therefore, we're doing a two-stage process. This first stage is to update the CSP to reflect the current situation. The next phase will be a comprehensive review, which will occur when we know more about the local government elections for the Central Coast. There are two documents attached to the council report. The first one's a summary of the changes and really reflects the relatively minor changes that we're doing to the objectives within the CSP to reflect the financial situation. And then the full draft revised CSP is attached in attachment 2 to the council report. Now, the CSP is the first element of the IPNR suite. As the CEO indicated, there's a delivery program, a resourcing strategy, long-term financial plan, workforce management strategy, and revised asset management strategy. I'll pass over to the CFO, Natalia Cowley, to talk through those other items.
Thank you through the chair, and thanks, David. So this report is putting the delivery program on exhibition, which includes the operational plan. The delivery program for 2022-2025 is done on the proviso that council is able to maintain the current level of services that it is providing, and therefore the suggested deliverables are consistent with that level of services. There is a determination and a number of identified areas that which services will be reduced if council isn't able to secure its revenue. As part of the draft resourcing strategy, there is the long-term financial plan. But in this case, we have provided 3 scenarios of a long-term financial plan, which is different from every other occasion. The reason for that is that we need to provide those scenarios as part of our special rate variation, and they would inform which scenario ends up being proposed going forward next year, depending on IPART's determination should council continue with an application. The 5 scenarios are explained in detail in the resourcing strategy and also in the executive summary, but just as a summary, there is a baseline scenario, which is essentially our catastrophic or bankruptcy impact scenario. It is provided specifically to satisfy the requirements of IPART, which requires council to provide a maintenance scenario that keeps the status quo of services. So council cannot keep the status quo of services when if the revenue reduces, and therefore this scenario is catastrophic. There is the maintain scenario, and that is the proposed special rate variation scenario, which is well described. And then we provide a deteriorate scenario, which is the distressed community impact scenario, whereby if council is unsuccessful to obtain a special rate variation, it will need to reduce its expenses by the same quantum, which is approximately $26 million a year. And there are two scenarios which are not budgeted, which is the enhanced scenario, but we provide information as to why such a scenario hasn't been budgeted, and also we are providing clarity as to why a scenario of receiving a special rate variation of less than 7 years is a unsustainable scenario for council. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. Now, I have had some concerns raised with my office from members of the community about the fact that the lack of consultation. I would stress that this requirement has been placed upon us by IPART to do this. We have no other time because we have been flat out, as some people will be aware, with consultation over water and sewer charges. There's the SRV. We now have to consult over the CSP, which is, as Mr. Milliken said, is the highest level of strategic planning undertaken by the council, and it does identify the aims and aspirations of the community. Now, that original one was done in 2018, and it actually expires. So whilst we would have liked more time, unfortunately, we are on a timetable as laid down by IPART. And I have to stress, all of these papers that you see here have been done by pretty much the same group of people, predominantly in the finance team and Mr. Milliken's team. And I have to commend and thank the staff, who I know, because I've seen them, emails going back at 10:30 at night over the weekend, trying to make sure this happens, and that we got these papers here today. The comms team, who look after the whole strategy, of course, have been instrumental in making sure all of this came together. So I just have to say a big thank you to the staff for actually getting us to this position. As I said, the papers have only just arrived, and I'm going to be perfectly honest to say I have not read them all, but clearly I understand what the whole thing is about. Now, I also want to point out, because there's been a couple of things during my time when I have been talking to members of the community, and I think I've talked to approximately somewhere in just under 400 people since COVID restrictions eased. I've been in the position where I can actually face-to-face talk to approximately 400 people. I got a lot of comments during that time, and when it was fully explained to people, they did actually understand the situation was in. And if you have a look at the micromix survey, which is attached to the report, you will see that the community by and large supports continuing the current service level with the current level of expenditure. But one thing I found slightly not amusing, I have to say, but people did not seem to understand that our application to IPART is not about a rate increase. For those, when you get your rate notice, have a look at your rate notice today. Have a look at the top line that says the ordinary rate residential. There is a number there, and the dummy one I've got here is $972. There is the waste charge, and there's a waste 240 litre waste upgrade for the bins. Those are the three items on there. We are talking with the SRV, that top line, which says ordinary rate residential. I need to stress, we are not talking about increasing that rate. We are talking about maintaining that rate. The only additional to that will be the 1% that IPART have allocated to all councils to inflate that number by. So every year from this point onwards, what we are requesting from IPART is to maintain that number plus the percentage, what's called the rate cap, which is an inflationary figure, which will be added to that number every year. Some people still seem to believe that we are talking about another 15% year upon year upon year. We are not. That surprised me that people hadn't grasped it. So I'm just taking the opportunity to say, have a look at your rate notice, look at the top line, which is a residential rate, and accept that's what we're asking you to continue to pay to retain the current level of service you're getting. Or, if IPART don't agree with that application, then they will remove $26 million from our revenue side, which means we then have to start cutting costs to make sure that we have a bottom line that still produces a surplus. I also want to point out I don't know why my mic went off, but it did. So the documents have gone out for exhibition. I want to stress, as the Chief Executive Officer said, they are out for exhibition, so we will be taking the comments back on board. I do apologise for the timeframes and so on, but as I said, that is not of our doing. We have done everything that we could do, which is cut costs, sell assets, and reduce staff numbers and obtain the 15% increase. But we are still awaiting Audit New South Wales to audit our books. They're now proposing that that goes out till February, which will be nearly 6 months since we submitted the financials for audit. And we're waiting to get the data to go to IPART. So whatever happens, the organisation and the community is going to be waiting until we know our future. So following our submission of the documentation, which will go in on the 3rd, I think, or somewhere the first week of February, we will be waiting until mid-May before we will know our future. So during that time, unfortunately, we are going to be in limbo, but we will be planning for either options that we have to look at, ready to implement one of those options as from July 1. So with that, I'm now going to move those recommendations that are shown on the screen, and I particularly need people to note recommendation 2, because of the speed and the rush, Council is going to authorise the Chief Executive Officer to make any amendments that are necessary to correct things, spelling, punctuation, the odd number or two, because of the rush. So I'm very comfortable that I can leave that in the hands of the CEO to actually correct that before making the final submission through to Council to go out and off to IPART. So there's a number of documents there. I urge people to look at them. I urge people to have a look and see what is not going to happen should we have to cut costs, because that is the reality we are facing. And as I said, I'm pleased to see from the Micromix data, who are totally independent of Council, in their survey work, which is scientific to the extent that it's significant in terms of the results, to I think presumably a plus or 4 minus significance level, which is the normal level for their surveys, that you can see quite clearly the community is strongly in support of retaining the current expenditure and level of service, and even indeed increasing it. I would also remind you that the backlog for the Council of Infrastructure stands at just under $250 million. So you can see it will be pretty traumatic if we lose $26 million off the revenue line. So with that, with the resolutions on the screen, I move those as a decision of Council. And we'll move on to item 2.2, which is the investment report for November. Ms. Cowley, I think you can speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Well, this is a great report. It's our first month when this council is able to cover its unrestricted deficit from the water and drainage funds straight from the unrestricted funds available in the general fund without having to borrow anything temporarily from the internal restricted funds. This is a great outcome from council. It is expected that this situation will revert back to normal next month as part of normal operational movements of council. But for now, the position for November is very favourable. The consolidated funds amount is $572 million. There is $42.7 million in unrestricted fund deficits that are covered by the unrestricted funds available cash in the general fund of $48.5 million. And the weighted running yield for November is 0.92%, which is very favourable compared to the rolling 3-year benchmark bank bill swap rate of 0.59%. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Ms. Cowley. It is a moment for celebration. That, and it is just in this particular point in time, as Ms. Cowley pointed out. But technically speaking, this point in time, we have repaid that $200 million that was unlawfully used. You have to remember that's been done in 12 months. Now, the timing-wise and so on, because of the inflows and outflows, probably means that will go back slightly into deficit over the next month or so. But I fully expect by the end of this financial year, that money will have been repaid, and we will have some positive cash in the general fund, or as I call it, the working capital. In other words, we'll have some finance and monies available should we get another East Coast low to be able to spend and clean up, etc., etc. So it's an outstanding effort. As I said, that the teams inside the organisation have been going overtime, big time. I might add, not charging for the overtime. We don't pay overtime as much as we can avoid it at the present time. But nonetheless, the achievements has been pretty phenomenal given the circumstances from where we came. So with that, I am going to move the recommendations and, as shown on the screen, and make those as a decision of council. Item 2.3, the monthly finance report. Mr. Farmer, I'm sure you're going to enjoy talking about this too.
This report's, I guess, consistent with the investment report in that the council continues to perform strongly this financial year, maintains the ahead of budget performance that was shown over the last month or 2 months. And in fact, at this stage, we're approximately $15 million better than our budgeted figure after 5 months into the year. Much of that is driven by filling of vacant or not filling of vacant positions, and so we don't expect to travel as well as we had for the first 5 months for the balance of the year. However, that provides us with a buffer. We're aiming for a small surplus this year. At the moment, we're running significantly better than that, but we're anticipating as the organisation ramps up and some timing issues for that to come back closer to a small surplus. But overall, we're travelling very well with all the settings have been put in place, as Mr. Hart said, reduction in costs, sale of assets, increase in the revenue line through the 3-year SRV that we've been able to do, and we're continuing every month to perform well according to budget. This report also significantly adjusts the capital works program, and you'll see it on a monthly basis. We'll continue to fine-tune our capital works program to ensure that we're able to substitute works and deliver as far as possible works to council as certain works find difficulty in being delivered, that we identify other works in the forward works program to bring in to ensure that we're able to deliver the best possible outcome for the community over a 4-year period.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Well, again, you know, a great report to end the year with. I have to say I am confident, and hopefully Mr. Farmer is as well, that we will actually meet the forecasted surplus that we set for the original budget, presumably not the revised one. And I'd have to say I think I feel confident that we will achieve that. So again, as I said, an outstanding effort from Mr. Farmer and the team here inside the organisation of actually having the discipline and the rigour to manage the entity so that we are achieving those surpluses. And I have to remind people, it is 12 months to the day that I got the phone call from the bank to say, following our submission of this particular letter of support, that they were going to advance us the $100 million. So it is literally this day, 12 months ago, that we actually got that money, which has enabled us to, of course, restructure, carry out all the work that we've needed to do inside the organisation and start producing a result which is commensurate with our income that we currently receive. So with that, I'm going to move the recommendations that are shown on the screen and adopt those as a decision of council. And with that, that brings this extraordinary meeting to a close, and I'll close it at 4:33 p.m. Thank you.